Thank you everyone for joining us today. A warm welcome to you to this evening. We've had over 1,200 people sign up for this event. So huge interest, and we know that not everybody can make it in person, and many of you will also be watching this later, but just special welcome to those of you who are here live and will get the fullest possible download from our wonderful speakers, conversationalists, wise circle of beings tonight. And yeah, also warm welcome to you who are watching this later. So we are here tonight to launch a very special book, which is you can all get in the bookstores from today onward. Climate, Psychology and Change. New perspectives on psychotherapy in an era of global disruption and climate anxiety. And my name is Kasia Hübl. I serve as the CEO of the Pocket Project, where we grow pockets of healing for pockets of trauma. And we also host an annual Climate Consciousness Summit in parallel to the UN Climate Conference. So it will take place again in November this year. And it's in that framework that Steffi Bettnarek and I met and started the conversation that led to this amazing event tonight. And it's a deep honor for us in the Pocket Project to co-host this event with Steffi Bettnarek and the Climate Psychology Network. And many of the speakers tonight have also been part of the Climate Consciousness Summit. So we'll have with us tonight Thomas Hübl, Bayo Akomolafe, Nora Bateson, Francis Veller, Deepa Mirchandani, James Vaccaro, Caroline Lucas, and of course, Steffi Bettnarek. And all of you. And it's really in this collective space, growing a container of collective hosting, that we are entering this space tonight. Because part of what we need to remember, and what Steffi also writes about in this book, is to hold each other in collective container spaces as we move into deepened insecurity, but also a deepened exploration of who we are if we start realizing that the systems we've created together are destroying our world. And also the processes of grief and uncertainty and fear that are touched in us as we move through these times. So I would like us just to take a moment at the beginning of this call to come home to ourselves, to our bodies. Thomas Hübl often says that this body is the closest part of earth, the closest piece of land, the closest access to nature that each of us has. So let's just take a moment to enter more deeply into our embodiment, into our earth beingness, the biosphere that is our body. And you might want to close your eyes. Maybe we can actually go to gallery view for a moment. And just, yeah, so that we become conscious, more conscious of our collective body here tonight. And just take a moment to allow your breath to deepen. And for your awareness and your body being to merge. Allowing your breath to widen, deepen the embodied space you are hosting. Allowing this body to land more fully in earth. As you sense into your grounding, allow gravitation to settle you. And let's also take a moment to welcome emotions, the movements of aliveness, of care, of love, of grief, of anger, fury, outrage, love, fear that accompany us through these times. And just allow a space that welcomes our feelings, a space for them to be felt, be hosted in a larger nervous system. And welcoming our minds that are often very busy in our days, trying to find solutions for a multitude of things. Yeah, letting our minds settle, becoming a wide open space that allows deep listening. Co-sensing to arise. Yeah, and into this space, I would like to read the dedication of the book. May we weave back together what has been torn apart and create the conditions that allow life to thrive everywhere. May we weave back together what has been torn apart and create the conditions that allow life to thrive everywhere. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you all for being here. Each of you brings a contribution into the space that can be felt. Yeah, and I just want to also bring in one feedback to this book from Satish Kumar, founder of Schumacher College and dear friend of many of us, who writes that climate psychology and change is an outstanding update of the eco-psychology movement. A broad range of perspectives are brought together in this collection of essays showing that the human soul cannot be healthy on a sick planet. The healing of the anima mundi and the healing of the human soul depend on each other. Yeah, and with that, I would love to introduce Steffi Bednarek to you, who will be leading us into an overview of what to expect this evening. Maybe just shortly from my side, we'll be speaking about a few core questions. What if our normal world is profoundly unwell? Who is responsible for nurturing it back to health? What does it mean to be human in a time when the familiar is dying? And we'll be having a panel conversation between Thomas, Bayo, Nora, and Francis. We'll have times where we just open the chat for you to bring in your comments and thoughts. Then we'll have a round of trans-contextual perspectives from Deepa, James, and Caroline, bringing feedback from their worlds on how helpful is this conversation actually for where they stand. And then we'll hear back from some of the main panel. And yeah, we'll flow. So we have space tonight. We didn't want to shorten this call to the usual hour or at the most 90 minutes, but offer a space to really move into an exploration. And Steffi Bednarek, who's really the initiator of both the book and this conversation, is a climate psychology consultant, trauma therapist, and public speaker at the intersection between climate change, psychology, and ecological thinking. Steffi's work nurtures psychology-informed climate leadership, collective nervous system regulation, which we can taste right now with each other here, collective nervous system regulation, and regenerative action in a time of global upheaval. Steffi, it is such a joy to collaborate and befriend in this space together. And thank you for all the work that you do and what you've brought into this evening. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kosha, and thank you so much to the Pocket Project. It was such a wonderful offer for you to host this event and for me to be able to bring this event to this really beautiful platform. I think it's a really good fit between what I try to do, we try to do as the contributors to the book, and what the Pocket Project does in the world. So thank you, and thank you for being willing to host this. And for me, it's very, very special to be able to welcome Caroline Lucas, James Vaccaro, and Deepa Mirchandani, who actually come from a field that is not from the mental health profession. So I think they are going to bring in something that I feel like needs to happen more and more, so that we start to have conversations across the divides that we usually draw around our disciplines. So the book asks the question, if our sense of normal in Western society is profoundly unwell, and if that is true, who is actually responsible to nurture it back into health? And so those three people are, in their own way, attend to the sickness and the culture. But they do it in very different ways as psychologists, psychotherapists, and mental health professionals would do. And so today we want to have an exploration about, do we have something in common? Do we have something that is worth exploring together across these divides? And do we have common ground? And if not, that's also really important to find out, where this may not be the case, or where we may actually speak a very different language. And there will be other events like this, one in the USA and in Australasia. And we hope for these events to start learning from each other, so that we're not really after answers, certainties, and solutions, but we want to really feel into the important questions of our time and expand those questions and maybe live into them. So the way the event today is designed is that James, Caroline, and Deepa are going to start as keynote listeners, whilst the other four contributors who contributed to the book are keynote speakers. Keynote speakers who are going to explore the question from their own backgrounds. I know that Nora isn't from a psychotherapeutic background, but Nora kind of brings a lot of ecological thinking and systems perspective to deepen us into a wider perspective. And I'd like to also mention that there are, Nora, Bayo, Thomas Hübl, and Francis were part of the book and contributed to the book. Thomas wrote the foreword. Nora was going to write an article about warm data, which some circumstances happened that wasn't possible in time. But there is a warm data piece in there, and Nora was very supportive of the book throughout. But of course, they're not the only voices. So there are 30 other contributors from all over the world, and all of them have contributed their own thinking from their own vantage point. And these are, in a way, they shouldn't be radical ideas, but they've been described as radical ideas. And I would describe them, the essence of the book, around decentering. How do we decenter ourselves as human beings? How do we decenter a Western perspective? And how do we decenter a sort of patriarchal anthropocentric lens? How can we decenter an individualistic perspective and think about the collective hunger that we have, but also the collective wounds that we may share, not just amongst humans, but also with the more than human world. So if it is true that our sense or that our culture is profoundly wounded and profoundly unwell, there's also an assumption, I would say, by all the authors and contributors to the book, that Western culture also lacks the kind of tools that we need to attend to the collective wounding. And so before we turn to mental health professions, who are often tasked with the healing task in Western culture, I think we also have to ask how the healing professions themselves may be entangled in a worldview that is costing us life on earth. So before we turn to singular professions as holding the answer or a answer, I think it's also important that we ask how we may actually be part of the problem. And that's what the book tries to achieve. And of course, it would not be conducive to this time here to kind of tell you about what all of the 30 contributors have contributed. So there's a website, there's a book website that you can visit where all the bios are visible, but also where you can further the conversation, because most contributors were also willing to offer further conversations, workshops, trainings, and that includes the 4 contributors that are here today. And I really hope that the conversations that we're going to have today are not going to give us answers and solutions and certainty, but that, as I said before, that they help us to feel deeper into the questions in terms of what is said, but also in terms of what is left unsaid. And sometimes the things that may touch you, it is not always clear where the vibrant idea that nurtures us back into health will come from. So that may come from the contributors, but that may also be something that arises in you. And that includes the possibility of feelings that arise in you that feel uncomfortable. And if that is the case, what would happen if we don't immediately discharge these feelings, like in the sort of traditional breakout rooms? But if we start to sit with them, walk with them, maybe dream into them, instead of immediately trying to breathe them away. So for me, there's an invitation of regenerative disturbance into this space. And if you feel like it would be conducive to explore this regenerative disturbance in the company of others, we will send you some possibilities and offers of where you might be able to do that after the event. But sometimes these disturbances actually are widening us. They have the potential to ripen us, and they can stretch us into a much larger place that makes it possible to bear what we previously thought was unbearable. And so that's why I think it is important to come together to find out how to contain these difficulties rather than to work on getting rid of them. And one of the last things I want to say about today is that for me, it was really important that the book launch was not an event of selling a book or a marketing event. So today is about entering conversation and bringing these ideas that are currently confined onto the page. It's to free them up again, because it all started with a conversation. Francis Weller, Bayo Akomolafe, Sally Weintraub, who's a climate psychologist, and Mary Jane Rust, who is an eco-psychotherapist, we came together 2 or even 3 years ago. And we met without an audience, even though all of these people I just named have a big following. We came together privately, and we had a conversation about the role of psychotherapy in a time when the familiar is dying. And that was it. There were no other prompting questions. We sat with silence if we didn't know what to say. And we felt into that space, which also meant feeling into our bodies and feeling into what may want to come through us. And in the same way, we're inviting the first contributors to feel into that relational space. So this is not about selling a book. This is about feeling into what arises for us. And that may be messy. So nobody's expected to come up with the next meme that we can post on LinkedIn, but it's about just staying with the questions. And I'm just thinking about whether I forgot. I'm sure I forgot something, but here we go. Here's the messiness already. I'd like to finish, excuse me, with a quote by James Hillman, who was an analytical psychotherapist who wrote a book called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World is Getting Worse. And what he says, let me just bring this up, is the psyche, the soul, is still only seen within and between people. By removing the soul from the world and not recognizing that the soul is also in the world, psychotherapy can't do its job anymore. The buildings are sick, the institutions are sick, the banking systems are sick, the schools, the streets, the sickness is out there. The world has become full of symptoms. How can we attend to them? And so in a way, that's the guiding question for us. And in order to bring this into conversation, I'm also really grateful that all the contributors agreed to decenter the singular voice, so that we can also just gesture towards a sense of that knowledge needs to be co-created rather than the celebration of this lone heroic voice. So without further ado, I hand over back to Kosha, and thank you all for being here. We've had almost 1,200 people sign up for this event. Of course, not everybody can turn up, but I'm just so glad that there's so much interest in this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Steffi. And I feel like you've really just rolled out a carpet for us to move into a place of collective listening. I love that we have key listeners today, and yeah, maybe in some way we're all here as key listeners, yeah, and key contributors. So thank you for the richness of this invitation into regenerative disturbance. And I think also with these words of Gabor Mate, the myth of normal, that we are here to unpack, see through, see into. Yeah, and with that, we're going to move into a conversation where we will open a space where 4 of our key speakers will be in conversation with each other. And you will be invited to simply find the flow between you, pass on the word to the next person, possibly sit in stillness for a moment, and we'll have around 45 minutes for that conversation. Towards the end, I'll just come back on screen with you so that you know it's time to bring it to a close slowly. And I just want to bring a short introduction to each of you. It's also like I guess a nod to normality, because I know that none of these words describe who you are, but that maybe they give us a glimpse. And also, if anybody wants to know more about you, there's a fuller version of the bios available on the website, and I think also in the invitations. So Thomas Hübl, who is just joining us, I believe, is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with new discoveries of science. And since the early 2000s, Thomas has been working in large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma. Bayo Akomolafe is rooted with the Yoruba people in a more than human world. He's a widely celebrated international speaker and disruptor, a post-humanist thinker, poet, public intellectual and author, and also the founder of the Emergence Network, a planet-wide initiative that seeks to convene communities in new ways in response to the civilizational challenges we face. Nora Bateson is an award-winning filmmaker, research designer, and international lecturer, as well as the president of the International Bateson Institute, based in Sweden. Her work asks the question, how can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within, so that we may improve our interaction with the world? And she explores this through warm data. And lastly, Frances Veller is a psychotherapist, writer, and soul activist. He's a master of synthesizing diverse streams of thought from psychology, anthropology, mythology, alchemy, indigenous cultures, and poetic traditions. He has introduced the healing work of ritual, especially around grief, to thousands of people. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. It is a joy to share space with all four of you, and the invitation to disruptive regeneration and regenerative disruption is in your hands. And also we have a guiding question for you, which you can take wherever you wish to and wherever it takes you. What if our normal is profoundly unwell? Who is responsible for nurturing it back to health? I'll just watch if somebody feels like starting. I'll leave it in your hands and I'll return to the screen in 45 minutes to see where we've arrived to and just bring back time. So over to you.
I think we're all going to stare at each other awkwardly. It's good to be with you, siblings.
Yes, brother. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Likewise.
So good to be with you.
Hey.
I mean, I guess for me, the one of the big issues with the idea of normal is that it immediately outlines and points to something as being not normal.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the history of that is horrifying. Nothing short of that. I've been doing quite a bit of research over the last few years on the sort of the early moments of eugenics.
Yeah.
And the way that came in right on the heels of fascination with industrialism and the metaphor of making things fit and work together. And that the notion that was created of what was within the thresholds of normal was created within a particular set of cultural epistemological ideals that had to do with fitting into an industrial colonial society that was sick to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of the horrifying aspects of this is the way in which so many other institutional processes were built upon that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So the education system, the health system, and we like to think that eugenics was actually about breeding, but it reached much further than that. It was about a whole cultural attitude around getting control of evolution. So this, for me, this is very much a place where all these things are coming together. So it was an ecological violence. It was a human violence. It was a psychological violence. It was a cultural violence. It was a racial. Anybody who didn't fit into the particular definition of normal needed to either be fixed or eliminated. And in the beginning of eugenics, people didn't understand the violence that this was going to be. I think they actually thought it was altruism. I think they were actually asking a question: how do we make more perfect citizens so we can have a more perfect society? And they didn't understand what was going to happen, or did they not care? Because there were people who were pointing to it. My grandfather was one of them. Boaz was another. Mead was another. There were people who were saying, watch out, this is not okay. This is evil. This is violent. So I guess, whenever we're looking at these surveys or stages or possibilities of defining normalcy, the first question for me is who survey? What were the questions? What are the underpinning epistemological assumptions that are in those questions?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Flowing from what you're saying, Nora, and thank you for bringing up eugenics. I was just thinking about the history of the bodies, the Black bodies in the United States that were deployed for purposes to public health, right? To study a certain disease, and I'm going to speak about this like people don't know about it, a certain disease that was made up just to see the longevity of that disease, under the guise of treating and holding space for these Black bodies in Alabama. They were used and deployed and discarded, which tells me that the pathological is political, right? And following from that, the therapeutic is historical. It doesn't just come into the world, it's not just there ahistorically in a culturally neutral way. What healing is tied to cultural, political, epistemological, ontological cosmovisions about what it means to be a body and what it means to be proper. And we have always been navigating these dynamics. If some people hear climate psychology, the first thing that comes to mind for many people hearing this, even people trained within the field, is that climate psychology is about offering propitious rituals to the gods of climate, to appeal to those gods so that we can have less anxiety. It's about tending to bodies within the space of upheaval. I think that, and I think this is what this book sets out to do, that climate psychology is not so much about tending to bodies within chaos and catastrophe as it is about noticing that the therapeutic is migrant and that our bodies are no longer locatable within the categoricity of modernity and its arrangements. Is there something about how we are allocated and designated and named and held within the spaces of modern civilization is proving to be toxic, that our aspirations as bodies, our yearnings, our desires as bodies outweigh the capacity of modernity to hold. So it's about locating the therapeutic again. Something about my work and how I come into these spaces compels me to bracket what we call healing. Because a lot of healing, a lot of modalities of healing have played out in, I was just speaking about Tuskegee a while ago, have played out in very deleterious, harmful ways to people, not just people who look like me, but people around the world. Right? So there is a sense here that the normal is no longer capable of holding the weight of our belonging and our becoming. That the familiar is sick. Jean Horry, in the 60s, interviewed by a magazine, would say the hospital itself is ill, right? The hospital itself is ill. And so it seems that these times call for new kinds of modalities that might seem to be experimental, but we can no longer sit within the prisons of propositions that presume that all we need to do is just get healing, because that also is problematic here. And I throw the hot potato to one of you brothers.
Yeah, maybe I'll go. So first of all, thank you. It's great to be with everybody here. And yeah, the normal, I think what I want to maybe just for a moment direct our attention to is how we normalize, like what does it mean to grow up in a system that teaches me how the world is through different people, different environments, through different, but what when we use the word normal, what does that mean in terms of being conditioned by a system, like learning from a system and all its properties, and also maybe being cut off a big part of data stream when we live in a system that has a hyper focus on individuals, like that the box, how we look at life, becomes very small, and that a lot of data and a lot of properties and processes are kind of excluded from health of the individual, which I think is something important to review. And then I somehow I want to look a bit at when we look at society, or when we look at history, like when we say like history lies behind us, or history is us. Integrated history is us having this conversation, and it's not separate from us as a context I learn about, but it's in the ancient hard disk of our bodies, like the entire history and all the ancestral achievements are present. So I think what you said, Bayo, about the modernity and the compartments that we create, that hyper individual view on life and the missing out of a much bigger ecosystemic self that we also are, I think is a very important part. And if you take that into account, then normal relieves me from relating. Normal is a state. What does this mean at all? Normal in a present relationship. Is there anything like that? Or is normal already, does normal need the absence of a present relationship? I think these are all great questions, like aspects of that question. I want to just put this in the room and then develop it as we go along. But maybe Francis, you want to continue here?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Good to see you again, Bayo and Thomas. Nice to meet you, Nora. I'm always curious about what is the allure of normal? What is that attracts people to the normal? And that sits upon a profound wound around our failure to welcome people into a culture. So you want to become normal. I mean, people come into my office and, underneath their anxiety is this hope that they can become normal, that they can fit in. Because there's this anxiety built into the system that you are always chronically on the outside. and you're anxiously trying to find the crack in the wall that might allow you to fit into the normal culture that you fit in. And so people come into my office and there's this urgency to change, but usually that urgency is rooted in a sense of self-hatred. Mm-hmm. That the very shape of my being is flawed, is defective. And maybe therapy can right the ship a bit so I can look more presentable to a culture that does not know how to welcome me. But soul refuses to conform to that ideology. Soul continuously brings pathology to us, depressions, addictions, anxiety, as a way to disrupt. It will never conform to the pattern of normalcy. It refuses to be co-opted by the ideology of normalcy. So there's a consistent pressure from soul, from psyche, to, in a sense, articulate our uniqueness. So the thing about normalcy is it leads to kind of a flattening of culture. And so what a forest wants, or what a living culture wants, is uniqueness, is diversity, is some kind of expression of our authentic being. But normalcy squashes that. It in a sense, it slays that. But what I love is that psyche, soul, refuses to play that game. It will consistently undermine our agendas of fitting in, of being perfect people, and consistently bring pathology to our lives. And if we extend that outward, the anima mundi, the soul of the world, is doing the same thing. It's refusing to normalize the systems of domination and suppression and control. It's bringing its own pathology into the collective body. And there's wisdom in that. James Hillman, Steffi mentioned James, was a primary teacher of mine. He said, "In your symptoms are your soul's deepest desires." So if we think about that individually, we can track something in those symptoms that lead us into a deepened sense of who we are and where we belong and what is sacred. But we can also do the same, I think, for the collective symptoms. What are they saying to us? What are they asking from us? It isn't simply to make adjustments to the economic systems or how we treat one another, but there's a much deeper requirement that these symptoms are speaking to. So I'll start with that.
As you were,
may I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I forgot one more thing. The collective failure, and I'm talking about white Western culture primarily, to welcome its people has profoundly left a mark in us of this unanswerable emptiness. And this emptiness that we carry around from day to day is what drives so many of the systems of destruction right now, whether it's from economic systems or empire. We're always trying to fill this emptiness with something. And that emptiness cannot be filled by what we call secondary satisfactions: rank, privilege, power, wealth. Those things never satisfy that hunger that in the depths of that emptiness. That's where we have to go back to what soul brings us to touch, to connection, to ritual, to community, to beauty, to poetry. Those things touch that emptiness, and we need to weep into that emptiness for decades, I think.
I was just going to say that as a parent, it's been really interesting to notice how many parenting books are about basically how to have a well-adjusted child and what to do to help your child be well-adjusted, and this intergenerational urgency to fit each other into whatever this normalcy is. And the way that idea of normalcy is it's so lonely, right? I mean, I know as a kid that all I wanted in the world was to be normal. And of course, it's impossible, because what even is it? It's just it's an idea that actually nobody fits into. So there's this larger idea of normalcy that is how life is. This is just how life is, right? You know, there's that quote about it's easier to imagine Armageddon than the end of capitalism. Because this is how life is. It's just how it is. And this is normal, and this is the familiar, and this is the way it is. But it isn't the way it is. It's the way that it has become. But that doesn't mean that it can only be like this. There are lots of ways of living together and being together that don't look like this kind of mutual double binding and destruction. So I'm just interested also to bring in this intergenerational thing. And Thomas and Bayo, you guys both spoke about ancestors. And also coming generations that were, you know, I need to fit in and succeed in this system for the generations to come on behalf of the generations that passed, as an idea that is bringing profound harm, not only to individuals, which of course the whole myth of the individual is really, really very much at the heart. And it's right there in this idea of how do you fix a truck? You can pull out the individual components and replace them or fix them and put them back together. But that's not how a family works. That's not how a forest is. That's not how a living ecology of relationship and communication is not replaceable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. I sense we're developing something here around normativity and its critical limitations that feels very, very potent to speak on. Last night I was washing dishes, which is a thing to do when you're single daddying. My dear wife has traveled, and I just finished a talk and I ran to wash the dishes, and then my son, after I fed him, was walking around. He's 6 years old and he's autistic, and he was walking around the house, just walking around, just rapidly, just moving around. And I have been trained, I have to say, quite vulnerably. I was trained in a culture where kids don't do that. Okay. I was brought up in Nigeria where kids sit still, right? It's part of your education, not just cultural, but institutional, where you have to sit down. Parents, their most consistent refrain is sit still, sit down, right? And whether I agree to that thesis of sitting still or not, the molecular vocation travels through me. Speaking about intergenerational matters, Nora, it travels through me. And I felt the urge to tell him to sit still while I was doing the dishes. But instead, I said to him, could you tell me why you're walking around again and again? Just why you just keep on doing that? And he said to me, 6 years old, he said, I have things to do that you know nothing about. I have things to do that you know nothing about. The mistake here would be to say Kea has autism. There's something diagnostically prestigious and comforting about categorizing the world. And I think that that is what normativity is. It's standardization. It's Foucault's biopolitics. It's how we organize life. We want life to be predictable, to be stable. And I'm not even pathologizing that. I'm not saying that's evil, right? Looking into bodies and creating standards already, like you have suggested, creates deviations. The very same moment when the asylum was made was the time that normativity, the same moment that normativity was reinforced and reified. So we create these dynamics, or we are created within these dynamics of organizing life in particular ways. I think what we're leaning into is that normativity is not life itself, that life exceeds and spills beyond the arrangements, the spatio-temporal arrangements that we make, the diagnostic tools with which we assign what it means to be a proper body. And this might be a good place to speak about Lacan and what he would have said about my son, that my son isn't proper, maybe because he doesn't have language before he developed language. He doesn't speak, so he's not a proper self, because to think is to use language. We've always had these vocations. So maybe the tendency towards systematically arranging life, often in a hierarchical manner, in racialized ways, maybe that is what normativity is doing. And what, therefore, does hope look like? I'm leaning into the question of whose responsibility is it to heal this? I'll just go right out and say that I don't think it's our responsibility. I think reducing agency to the human that acts upon the world is another resuscitation of white modernity, right? That, oh, it's left to you to do it. I think that would be a repudiation and a dismissal of the insights of Anima Mundi. Like there's to bring up James Hillman here, that there's something about decentering the soul from within the human that means we're caught up in other vocations and other dimensions that exceed us walking in to save the day. It would mean, for instance, that the world is active in its own imagination, that the world is an open-ended, promiscuous exploration of itself, and that the world, as you say so beautifully, my brother Francis, that what we rudely call pathology is the excess, the excessiveness of a world that will not be put in a family way, the world that will not be still, like my son, who has things to do that I know nothing about. So maybe it's not left to us. Maybe it's about us sitting in those sites of trouble. I call this generative incapacitation. And I hear Steffi, I think, jive with this as regenerative disturbance. So beautiful. That is in those sites of disturbances, of trouble, that we are summarily changed. It seems to me that the history of white modernity is the history of rehabilitation of monsters, that we're constantly putting the monstrous, the thing that doesn't fit in the family way. And that if we are to lean into new kinds of directions, it would be working with the kid that needs to walk around. It would be staying with the excess of diagnostic criteria. It would be bracketing normativity and its world-building process. It would be noticing that even psychology is not the study of human behavior. It is the manufacturing of human behavior. It would be staying with grief. It would be experimenting with our edges. And this is not our work to do. It is like human work to do. It is post-humanist. It is post-humanitarian. It is the Anima Mundi's work to do.
I loved, Bayo, when you said that when your son ran around and you felt the intergenerational calling to, like, say, sit still.
Sit still.
And I think in that sentence, for me, that summarizes our conversation so far, because it seems like one aspect of well-being, whatever that is in the willingness to have that impulse, to see that impulse, and to have the freedom to not say sit still. There's something in that moment that you notice the tendencies of your ancestry, and out of some reason, in that moment, you don't perpetuate it. So there's some sense, there's something in that moment that allows that to happen. And I think that quality relates very much to, we had a series of dialogues over the time. And I love very much, I think we agree very much on the capacity to be in the discomfort and to let life work through us. And that reminded me now of two things. Like, one is that moment with your son, and the other one, I think, though, that is also important, the same quality that allowed you not to enact that again is also what allows us to expand our awareness into where we usually look away. So there is some kind of internal freedom or internal presence or something that allows us to look where until now we didn't want to look, we as humanity, or we as our ancestral streams, or we as the perpetuation of some forces that work through us. And so I'm very curious about the capacity that happens in that moment, because I think it is important for our world that I think the normal is also like a ghost of our past, because in the present experience, I think the normal is being dispelled. There is no normal. Normal is already kind of a crystallized
It's a
aspect.
performance.
Right. When I feel you and I'm really with you, and we are in this moment together, there is nothing normal. Normal is not a factor. Normal is a factor of this relation, not sensing, not being with each other, not joining the same discomfort. It's not that we feel good all the time, not at all. We can feel in the same tension with each other, but there's nothing normal about it. So I think when we are committed to join that alchemical process that you were speaking about, then we also like become a hub together to surface, I think, some of the very important aspects that we need to surface that are tamed by certain words or certain psychological descriptions or certain ethical rules or laws. But there is something about us being willing to open that box in a way deeper than we did until now for that alchemical process to progress through us that you described. So I'm very curious about this alchemical moment that allowed you to not perpetuate, because in that, I think there's a lot about the original question.
You know, I love that you brought that up, because I write about ghosts a lot. And that's why I wanted to open with eugenics today, because there's something really important about having an attention or maybe even a distrust of some of the ways in which these habituated scripts are coursing through our bodies. so, you know, Bayo's example of this thing with the impulse to say, sit down. And I certainly have had those impulses with my kids too.
High
And
five, Nora, just
yeah,
before you can do this. High five.
and I
There you go.
remember one time going into my daughter's room and there were just clothes all over the floor, you know, as there are. For some reason, that's where the clothes belong. And some of them were mine that she had borrowed, you know. And there's the script. I loan you clothes. How do you live like this? Right? It's there. It is. And she looked at me and she said, "You can't tell me how to live my life." And of course, there's like some selection items in the ghost, right? As long as you're living under my roof, I can tell you how to live your life. Or, young lady, don't you speak to your mother like that. Or, right, you know, we have this stuff. It's locked and loaded, ready to go. And I looked at her and I saw this red hair and this fire and this being. And I was like, yeah, I don't have any right to tell you how to live your life. I said, yeah, you're so right. And she was like, not prepared for that. She was ready to go. She had another thing to come at me with. But it was such a beautiful moment for us because we moved off script together. And we didn't know where we were going. But in that movement, like with you and your son, there was something that showed us we could do this together. And that was really, I think, the beginning of something beautiful for the way that we could continue to learn from each other. And it really makes a different way of thinking about that thing that is immediately coming to mind to say, and to have a you know, a kind of a watch out of, wait a minute, where's that coming from? Is this something that is going to open new, disoriented, decentering possibilities, or is this going to confirm and reconfirm those grooves that are grooving us into deeper epistemological, you know, ways of perceiving our world together and ways of perceiving each other? How do you get out of those habits? And I think the ghosts are really important, you know, that recognition. There are ghosts coursing through us and we have to come up to them, because they pop up all over the place. And I even see it in the discourse around what is collaboration. Because if you're not careful, collaboration can be very mechanistic. You have a role and you have a role and you have a role and I have a role. That's not collaboration. That's another thing. That's a mechanistic thing. Collaboration is when we don't know where we're going together. And we have to be very attentive to, who can I be when I'm with you? Who can you be when you're with me? How do we open up pathways together that we didn't see coming? How do I find aspects of myself that are not familiar to me when I'm with you? So I guess there's this thing of looking at the familiar and recognizing that in all of evolution, every organism kind of wants to keep things as they were. And yet, if they don't change, they become obsolete. So somewhere there's a place of the unseen where there is something brewing in the underground, in the unseen space that is not familiar. It's so unfamiliar that it's not perceivable. And it must be so. Because the second that comes into our scope of the familiar, or any organism's scope of the familiar, it gets put back into those perceptions that will see it as, you know, in the way that you listen to a new piece of music and you say, oh, that reminds me of, sounds like, taste a new food. Oh, that's a lot like. It gets it gets put back into the digestive system of the familiar.
Mm.
So there must be something unseen. And I have been exploring that with this word of phonipoesis. I won't get into that here, but something in the unseen world that is holding that which is beyond our expression, and even comfortable perception. So this disorientation is really important. Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Mm.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also thinking about just where are we heading species-wide, planetary-wide. This is not a season of ascent. We're not heading towards clarity or a direct understanding. We are in a deep process of descent.
Mm.
And
Mm.
the descent takes us into the unknown. It takes us into the darkness.
Mm.
And we need to trust that there's something decipherable in some way about our time in the dark. There's a lovely line from Susan Murphy says, we need to develop a dark adapted eye. We need to see in the darkness now. So this is not a time of knowing. It's not a time of confidence, not a time of ease. It really is about steeping ourselves in the waters of humility. We don't know what's going on. We don't really have a clue what's going on. And I love this, Bayo, your story about your son, and that question you brought at Thomas about what happens in the alchemical moment is we're being asked to practice something almost completely undeveloped in Western mind, which is restraint. Can we pause? Can we allow a new thought, a new imaginal moment to arise? Restraint is like the most undeveloped spiritual value in Western civilization. It's always impulse, do it, achieve it, accomplish it, grab it, but this
Let's
idea,
go. Let's do
let's
it.
go. This idea of stepping back, letting your son, in a sense, discover the moment for himself and to teach you about that moment.
Mm.
It took restraint. You had to allow that moment to become itself rather than to dominate the moment with a prescribed ideology.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are right now collectively, is we're living in this place of potential revelation, but we have to get quiet, practice stillness, get slow, and practice deep humility. I don't know what's going on. Does anybody know what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Nora does, I think. Nora has an idea of what's going on.
You're right.
I'm thinking about the etymology of the word monster, and it has nothing to do with those Disney-esque future figures with horns and hooves and the pathological being outside of our sensorium, our ways of sensing and perceiving the world. It means to work. And of course, the monstrum, the etymology, the word monster is right there in the word demonstrate, right? It's to put to work or reworking. There's something almost theological about it. It's like the world itself is calling attention to the reworking of our senses. Like it's saying, don't pass, conveniently. Don't just pass with your sandals on. Remove your sandals here. This is not just this is not a normal road. There's something here that you want to pay attention to, and don't even trust in your attention giving capacities, because there's something about clarity that obscures what is happening here as well. So don't look for the full picture. Don't strive for the complete image. Be sensitive to defeat. In the words of Rilke, the man who is defeated again and again is blessed, right? There's something about the invitation to fall, to not know, that is powerful here for me and is signaled in the configuration and the idea of the monster, a demonstration, a reworking of our bodies. Again, climate psychology, here for me is not about fixing people so that they can adapt into these times, which is the reason I'm highly suspicious of terms like sustainability. I know people are trying to be good, and this is not a pathologization of their efforts. I know people are trying to work within the fields of responsibility that have been designated to them. It's just the case that responsibility is dispersed. It is not our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the web, of the assemblage. In the words of Deligny, it is not the spider that makes the web. It is the web that makes the web, right? Just as it is not the traveler that knows the way, it is the road that knows the way. Speaking of decentering the human, is about coming to terms with the fact that sometimes the ways that we will address our critical events will reinforce those events, right? Will reinforce those critical troubles and challenges. Under the headline of sustainability, a lot of waste colonialism happens. Under the headline of healing and restoration, a lot of re-entanglement and reinforcement of troubling dynamics happen. Under the headline of justice or inclusion, for instance, or rehabilitating exclusion, the building, the architecture of oppression is maintained. So I'm looking for the monster's path, right? I know we're addicted within our times and the ways we tell stories to the monster, to the hero's journey. It's about us departing from where we are, going underground, defeating the monster. Is always about defeating the monster. Maybe we save 2 or 3 damsels, and then we emerge on the other side victorious, right? That narrative is so tied with how we see these times of chaos and uncertainty that I feel that there's something about the monster's journey that's inviting us, into depths, not to reemerge victorious, but to change. The monster is the agent of shapeshift. It's in the encounter that we are changed. And there's something about sitting with that trouble that re-energizes agency and politics to do other things that we don't know how to speak about yet.
It seems to me that we are again and again returning to. I like a lot of things that have been said. Like just want to mention 2. I like the eye that is adapted to the darkness or to the dark space, and also the monstrous, like, because in a way, isn't it that life reminds us in those moments of qualities that we do not exhibit in certain ways at the moment that we need to be reminded of. It seems like the monster reminds us of something that we don't voluntarily express. And I've been, for example, in many of those collective processes, and the amount of revelation in the darkness is amazing. So, Francis, when you spoke about can we, in a way, step back and not know, but isn't that sense of knowing already the effect of the effect of the effect, and that not knowing a state that allows us to be really intimate. And so I think that that's a beautiful reminder to see how intimate we are with the process of life, or and how knowing is a way to state our non-intimacy. with the process. So I think that's beautiful in both, in all that has been said. Yeah. Also the ghosts. I mean, there's a lot of like similar emergence here in the conversation that is beautiful.
Yeah, Nora isn't a ghost buster. Nora is a ghost hugger.
Yeah.
So I think, what are those experiences that loosen and make possible other ways of knowing that are not familiar to get out, to find their way into our communication? And I think there's you speak, Bayo, about the fugitive, and I talk a lot about being lost. And Steffi's talking about becoming decentered. And there's something around this, the discomfort, yes, but also the unimagined place. And that's not an invitation to imagine it.
Yes.
Right? So it's unimagined because it must be unimagined. And if we go around imagining it, it's likely that our imagination will actually fill it with all of this information that's been there. So there's something about being really lost that means that I didn't even imagine that I could not imagine that this was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And that pulls me out of the multiple overlapping habits that are we learn them in school. We learn them. It's in language. It's the way we think about health and healing. Like you were saying, I find that with my work in warm data that I don't really want to talk about the therapeutic aspect of it, because then it becomes a linear process. I'm going to do this to have a therapeutic experience. And if that happens, then it's, well, what kind of experience was it? How long did it take? How big was it? It turns into, and if you didn't have it, you failed. Or you didn't get your money's worth or something. Mm-hmm. And so I find I just better not to mention it. If it happens, it happens. And then that's great. But that's really not in keeping with the world that we live in, to allow things to happen and to see where they go, and how where they go leads to new things moving. When there is healing, it's not in the individual, it's something that happened, and then when they leave, they are in relationship with the world in another way that isn't about healing the world, it's just healing. And that is not contained or directed toward any particular relationship. It just is there. I find that interesting and difficult, because I can't bottle it. I can't sell it. I can't name it. I can't place it. I can't. Every time I try to put that into play, it turns into a linear goal. And then boom, it's gone. Just like that. So holding healing in a way that is not about healing at the first order, but healing in multiple relationships outside. Where'd Francis go?
Where did Francis go?
Where'd Francis go?
He developed an eye for the dark.
There he is. He's back.
Hey, we're coming. We're at the end.
You're muted, Francis, just in case.
All right. Thank
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're
Welcome.
at the end of this time and space. Francis, I was actually going to ask whether you want to complete with one last sentence, whether there's something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just very touched by everything that's being shared, and I'm just drawn back to the old ideas of alchemy that the work isn't about the self, the work is with the material.
Mhm.
And the alchemist's job was to keep the material warm. And we keep it warm with our affection, with our curiosity, with our interest, with our devotion. And I think that's part of what we're being asked to do right now is, can we keep the material warm, whether it's grief or fear, uncertainty, being lost? Can we bring our affection to that and to one another in a space of radical uncertainty? But keep the material warm so it can become what it wants to become, not what I've determined it should be. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
beautiful. And somehow I feel that the four of you have really brought that love into the space. You know, Thomas, you spoke about the full presence becoming our full presence, becoming a space that the new can come through, or what wants to emerge now, the imaginal space. And I think we all have a taste here right now with you of that presence. And as the conversation continued, it became warmer and warmer in my heart, definitely. So thank you so much. And I know that we're going to have to let you go, Thomas, now. Thank you so much for being with us for this hour. It's been wonderful having you. And Bayo and Nora and Francis, we're going to come back to you in half an hour. So we're going to take a detour, which is not a detour. It's a journey that leads us to different windows looking in at this emerging conversation and different worlds coming out to play. And I would love to start by just opening up to you in the chat to just say, maybe bring one word about what is most alive in you right now, just one word. So we just get a sense of how this is landing. The joy of monsters and seeing in the dark mixed in with awe, gratitude, messy sanctuaries, mystery, curiosity, open possibilities. Yeah, beautiful. And the chat has anyway been amazing. Yeah, and thank you again for this amazing journey. And I think we will need to create a transcript of this part of the conversation. There was just so much of beauty that came up in between you. We become a hub to surface alchemical change. We start moving off script together. All those are things that we witnessed here, that took place here. And with that, we would like to move to our key listeners who are now shape-shifting roles. And again, I'll just do a very brief introduction of you, and we'll be receiving feedback from you. How has this been helpful? Maybe discombobulating, yet helpful. So Deepa Mirchandani is committed to creating meaningful socio-economic and environmental change in the world, and has been working as a campaigner for human rights and international development for more than 20 years. She is a strategic advisor to both multinationals and a champion for social entrepreneurs. and recent COO of the Global Network of Social Entrepreneurs, Catalyst 2030. Welcome, Deepa. And James Vaccaro is CEO of repattern.org, supporting organizations and their stakeholders in effective ecosystem innovation and strategy for sustainable transformation. He's the chief catalyst of the Climate Safe Lending Network, a multi-stakeholder initiative to catalyze the decarbonization of the banking sector. Yeah, thank you, James, for being with us. And lastly, Caroline Lucas is the UK's Green Party's first Member of Parliament, chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Climate Change, and co-chair of the UK Parliamentary Groups on Limits to Growth and the Green New Deal, alongside serving on Parliament's Environmental Audit Select Committee. Caroline is one of the Environment Agency top 100 eco-heroes of all time. Yeah, warm welcome to all three of you. Thank you so much for, just the preciousness of your presence here with us. And in this round, we'll do it differently. So I'll be following time, and we'll have a round of 3 minutes each and a round of 2 minutes each. And at the end of the time, I'll just raise my hand and you can complete. But so that we can hear from each of you at least twice, and who knows, maybe more. Yeah, and we know just how precious time is sometimes in this world. So your time is precious to us. And thank you for being with us. So how was this conversation for you? Including also what Steffi brought, and what is helpful in what you've heard? What is maybe not helpful for the work that you do in the world? How does this combine, infuse, inspire you today? And maybe we start with you, Deepa, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's incredible to be here. And being a big fan of Steffi's. I sit within the kind of what she talks about in her chapter in terms of the fragmentation, and working with companies and working with movements to allow for shifts, to move towards creating the infrastructure, creating the systems and mechanisms that enable socioeconomic and environmental change. So I found the conversation, there were parts that I felt like a warm rush of calm. And then there were also parts that I found quite energetically triggering, to be honest. And there was it felt like a bit of a duality going on in me. And I think that's from a place of working with people whereby we're trying to hold space for that personal, to be able, and their personal feelings, and caring deeply about the world and socioeconomic challenges in the world, to allow that to help shape the organizations and the companies that they are parts of. And how does that show up? And so, and on the flip side, also working with social entrepreneurs and people on the ground who are deeply affected, and come from the majority world, and therefore experiencing a lot of this Western, what we've seen as the kind of the hurt and the energetic failure, and where the experiences are being felt elsewhere. And so there's the duality of, yes, this healing needs to happen, but the space for slowing down feels jarring in some ways, because there are people who are deeply suffering as a result of all of the things that have been spoken about. And so they don't have the time. And so there were some moments which felt like we can talk about, it sounds really beautiful to say, let life work through us. But, and that's a beautiful thing for the Western world to want to go through this epic realization of what has been fragmented and what has, where the soul, and Francis talks so beautifully about this, about soul and compassion and curiosity and devotion. But actually, the people that I work with, I was facilitating a session about regenerative agriculture and thinking about sustainable livelihoods of farmers last week, and working with a company and having people who work for that company sit with their own pain and sit with how can they show up more honestly, and how can that translate into their organization, but knowing they're gripped by commerciality and decisions that are going to be made elsewhere. So I found it quite complex. And then Nora spoke and I felt calm again. So I'll leave it there.
James, would you like to continue?
Yeah, thank you. It's an amazing privilege to be a keynote listener. That's like the role I've always wanted. And it feels like this whole conversation, there's been immense amounts of spaciousness. And there is the sort of the overwhelming feeling is contrasting that spaciousness to the feeling of scarcity that so many who I encounter on a day-to-day basis have not to trap themselves, that feels judgmental, just are in a cycle of scarcity. And I love what Francis said about there's the anxiety of like needing to be normal in order to not fit in. And it made me think about a game of musical chairs. And at the moment, in terms of the breakdown which we see us around us, whether it's in climate or nature, we've lost 2/3 of the wildlife since I've been alive. I've probably got 1/3 of my life left. We lose the rest of the third, there's no more life, let alone value or anything else that's in this system. So that sort of thought of scarcity is driving us to cling on even harder. And instead, in the book, Steffi sort of said it's only when things fall apart that the new self can emerge. I was quite touched by that, because the opposite of things not falling apart isn't necessarily the keeping it together. It is the clinging on in some way. And it's a clinging on of these treadmills, which once we're on that treadmill, we are contributing to making them go faster and more out of control. Whether it's economic growth, whether it's the growth of data, whether it's money, it's all one thing which just keeps on sort of running away from ourselves, and we can't get off that. I'd be interested in Bayo in the sustainability and what sustainability means as somebody who practices sustainability, because there's different stories of sustainability, and the sustainability which is practiced whilst being on the treadmill for very pragmatic reasons can often lead to personal disappointment, lots of frustration, incremental kind of moves. But to actually get off the treadmill and sow the seeds of the unknown, to kind of explore, I mean, in a way, what Nora was sort of saying is like this sort of sense of the unimagined, the research which you can't say what you're going to find at the end of it, because it's not possible, otherwise it wouldn't be research. That's a level of bravery which it's really hard to channel. And I think, and I have empathy, and I share it myself. It's not always possible to channel that amount of bravery. And what the last thing in terms of for now is in terms of the central question about normal being unwell, there's something about normal and natural. So the normal is what we get to define, and we've maybe had a lot of things which are not really serving us well about it, but there are over-amplified behaviors. And the fact that that's breaking down is something which we may be able to get to do about. The natural that sort of the whole sense of our exceptionalism to nature, us being apart, and the fact that the natural is breaking down is not something we get to define. It's whether we choose to understand it and how we respond to it.
Touching, thank you. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess in terms of what emotions this has kind of raised for me, I mean, there is a sense of discombobulation, because essentially I'm in the middle of this election campaign, which is totally crazy and busy and mad, and just suddenly kind of opting out for it for a moment and coming into this world. It is an incredible disjuncture, and it feels enormously healthy and an enormous privilege. But I'm also very aware that the other world is just outside my door any moment. So it's like a little oasis, I suppose, of greater vision and generosity and sanity. The question that you were thinking about, what if our normal is profoundly unwell, and who is responsible for nurturing it back to health? I guess the way that resonated for me was just thinking about what is normal right now is the fact that we are on our way to climate catastrophe. You know, in the words of the UN Secretary General, you know, we're on our way to climate hell. And what I really appreciated, I think, about the conversation, and actually, if I could just say to Frances how much I've loved The Wild Edge of Sorrow. It's just been such a transformative book for me, and it just really speaks to this moment when trying to understand why is it, knowing what we know about the damage that we're doing to the planet, why are we still allowing this to happen? And it seems to me that the answer isn't in the science, and it isn't in the finance. It is absolutely in the spirit and the soul and the psychology of the moment that we find ourselves in right now. And so while we can sometimes think that, you know, maybe it is that people are just too busy trying to get by, they don't have the time and the space to start thinking about the future of the earth when they're trying to put food on the table. Or maybe it's because they're being bombarded by so many advertisements telling them that the only way to be lovely and sexy and loved is to go out and consume some more, and that's very compelling as well. But actually, I think the real reason that we are not addressing the scale of the climate crisis as it is right now, and the crisis of the natural world, it is not to do with the finance, it's not to do with the science, it is to do with the fact that we are afraid of feeling the powerlessness and the despair that can come up in us when we really sit with the immensity of the damage that we're doing. And that is why I love Frances's book so much, because it feels to me as if there's a vision there about how we hold that grief and how we acknowledge it, first of all, and how we hold it, and how we create rituals around it, and how we have some hope, at least, of moving through it and with it. It's not going to go away, but we can live with it in terms of finding it in ourselves and each other to then rise to the extraordinary challenge that we face right now. So I just wanted to say that I feel that this conversation and this willingness to sit with uncertainty and potentially despair from time to time is just so important and so valuable. So thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Just so appreciating, you know, there's something profoundly grounding in hearing your voices here also. So yeah, we'll go into a second cycle, Deepa, and maybe also to go more deeply into this question of how can this inspire your work, or also how can your work inspire? Yeah.
I think it comes from, like, to what Caroline was saying about holding these spaces, and how do we hold these spaces for those real emotions to come out in our work. And so where Steffi started with the kind of the containers for these conversations, there is an increase of having people show vulnerability when we are working with whether it's social entrepreneurs or whether it's those working in large corporations, they're sitting with these emotions and sitting with these feelings. And how do we show up without being clinical psychologists and therapists, and support those conversations? So I think there's an invitation to what are the tools that we need in order to be able to hold those spaces. And there are different practices, from trauma-related design to Theory U and the work of, I think, like Otto Scharmer and people like that. But is that enough to be able to hold that level of vulnerability and that level of despair, to then be able to think about how do we show up? And being somebody who works very, very much in that space of how do we show up, doing it in a way that uses embodiment, uses time to feel into people's feelings when whether it's workshops or creating spaces or having conversations from C-suite to the full value chains of organizations, then I think there's a space for learnings from everyone who's contributed to the book.
Just building on spaces, I think that, you know, coming into a space like this, I feel my own inexpertise. But if what we're needing to channel is not being normal, it's feeling lost. I can be an expert in feeling lost. We can be experts in feeling lost together. We can be experts in being able to explore things and being able to, I think, to extend the despair. It's not our own despair. It's also looking at our children, next generation, feeling what is coming with our you know, other understanding, and seeing the world through their eyes, and using that as a propulsion to channel our own playfulness and creativity to carve out these spaces, to translate it into the positive energy. For I loved what Nora said about collaboration. It isn't just the functional kind of stuff. It is about allowing for new patterns of relationship to emerge. That's my field of research. That's what I'm most curious about right now. So many times trying to fit in various new creative business models or thoughts or ideas into the existing architectures is failing. We're trying to coach people to speak the language of finance. Why? It's not. People in finance recognize how much it's failing them. That's what they will all say. So why would we channel this in order to be able to make these new spaces conform with you know, within the kind of the constructs of the treadmill? I think it's a large reason why Bayo and maybe many others kind of go, this stuff isn't working, it isn't scaling enough, it isn't creating the feeling, it's not unleashing the positive energy required to make people go, yeah, this is where it is. It happens in fragments in local communities. It can happen in other spaces too, the translocal areas. And I think that's something which is, yeah, the powerful counterweight to the despair.
Over to you, Caroline.
Yes, thank you. I'm not quite sure where to take the conversation next, in a way. I mean, and another word that really resonated for me was how a number of you and Steffi as well have talked about this decentering, and that seems to be a very resonant word in terms of the relationship we need to have with the natural world, and the species that we are so privileged to share it with. And for me, that decentering, I think, is about a real entanglement with the natural world. And by that, I mean, I'm thinking policy-wise, I'm afraid, because I'm a politician, that's what I kind of bring to this. But I am passionate about things like the right to roam. I don't know how that translates in the US, but in the UK, the right to roam is something that basically means that you don't have fences everywhere, but you have a much greater assumption that people can go into natural spaces. And it feels to me that that is going to be so important going forward in terms of the way in which nature can heal us. We spend a lot of our time thinking how we save nature. I think we should just turn that on its head and recognize that nature has an enormous potential if we allow it to help heal us. And the way to do that is decentering ourselves, by which I mean not nature being outside and us being separate from it, but actually recognizing just how wonderfully part of the natural world we are. There's a little campaign that's going on in the UK right now which sums this up. There's an organization called Lawyers for Nature who are trying to change the definition of nature in the Oxford English Dictionary, because at the moment the Oxford English Dictionary defines nature as being anything other than human, the natural world, not human. And that is part of the whole mindset that's got us into so many of the messes that we now face. So decentering ourselves and recognizing we're part of the natural world, not separate from it, certainly not above it, but in and amongst it. And the right to roam literally physically gives us that familiarity and that intimacy with it. That, I think, can maybe provide some hope going forward.
Fantastic. Huge thank you. Special thanks to you, Caroline, for putting your energy into the policies and the right to roam. I live in Scotland, and it's very, very wonderful. You know, it's amazing to experience this, and also how few countries in the world have the right to roam across properties. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Deepa, James, Caroline. This was super sparkly, somehow in the synapses between the spaces, a lot of sparkles initiated, and I feel a lot more that can grow out of this. Thank you so much for being with us. Be well, be blessed, and may some of the abundance, spaciousness that we have here tonight travel with you into your worlds. Yeah. And let's just again have a little mirror. You know, I would love to just hand it back to the chat for a moment. And if you had just a word to express what was touched, what feels touched in you right now. So we just get yeah, and also, you know, as we look at these responses, echoes from our collective space, you might also take a moment to see whether you're still at home in your body while we're deepening space together here. How much are you still inhabiting this part of nature? Yeah, and with that, we'll move in a space of, yeah, kind of rounding off remarks, maybe spiraling off remarks, just preparing for the next cycle of the spiral. So we're going to invite Steffi and Francis and Bayo and Nora back online. Wonderful. Yeah, and this time we're going to use this 2-minute method. So I would love to invite you each just to express whatever essence wants to be expressed. And I'll just raise my hand after 2 minutes so that we can have space for each of your voices to come in.
I want to say thank you so much for this beautiful time. It has been First of all, it has been wonderful just being with my siblings here. Francis, Nora, Thomas are dear, dear, dear friends and siblings, and I'm so excited every time we gather. And Steffi, this book, may it travel and may it leave ripples of entanglement and joy and possibility in its wake. I do have something to say that feels like just one more heap, one more toss into the compost heap that we've been nurturing. I grew up in trash. I grew up surrounded by trash. I've told people this over and over again, that we didn't have playgrounds in Lagos. We had giant mountains of imported trash especially from the global north. I didn't have the political context or educational training to understand what was happening. I just understood that that was the way the world worked, that I was going to be surrounded by discarded materials that had recycling symbols on it. I had no idea what the recycling symbol meant. I just knew that this was the way that life worked. And then I was constantly, me and people in my generation, constantly enamored, with images of beautiful mountains in Switzerland, or the idea of development working properly in places like London or the United States. And so there was this upheaval, this desire to export our troubles and to, depart from our contexts. So anytime I travel, I often like to bring people to this realization of where I come from, and the energetics, the theories, and the dialogues, and the ideologies, and the experiments that inform the things I say. So when I say, for instance, that I was in Scotland just a couple of months ago as centenary philosopher at the University of Dundee, and I pointed out to people who are committed to the idea of sustainability that 350,000 tons of plastic is exported from Scotland to India and Pakistan, and that 90 to 95% of trash is exported from the US to places like mine. And that this is not a way of saying we shouldn't embrace sustainability. It's a way of saying we should hold the space of tensions so that other kinds of possibilities emerge. I'm trying to invite us to stay with the trouble, not to rush into a solutionism, but to stay with another paradigm of being well with ourselves and with the world. And maybe I'll just leave it at that, with thanks and gratitude.
Nora, will you go?
Okay. Thank you, Steffi, for bringing us all together like this, and Kasia for hosting, and Bayo and Francis. It's so good to be here together, and I hope that we can keep playing here, because I feel like we have 2.5 hours, which seemed like a lot of time, but actually we're just getting to the place where now we can go in. I think I'm resonating right now around this kind of contrast between this unnamed, untamed realm of being alive together and something like Kafka, and recognizing the way Kafka so viscerally showed and expressed the feeling of being unseen or misseen, of being in a world that had controls that were written in a way that you could not touch or shape or move. And how important that is in the remembering of how we allow each other to be with us, how we endeavor to perceive one another's complexity, if you want to put it like that, or just aliveness, or the multiplicity of possibilities in each of us. And the very stark contrast between that and these categories, these labels, these divisions, these polarities, which are probably more dangerous than anything else right now, because we cannot meet these moments if we cannot commune, if we can't learn together, if we can't go into a dance we don't know, if we can't sing a song we don't know together. And that is really what I see as where we are going. So what are those ways that we can actually give morale? Okay, because it's not strength, it's not skill, it's not this, it's not that. Somehow it's just the fire in the belly, the call to commune beyond these polarized positionings. And those polarities are concocted in a lot of political abstractions that become very real experiences. So I think for me, that's what I would like to go deeper in here. What is this healing that allows us to learn together? Yeah. Thank you so much.
Francis, do you go?
What a privilege to be here with such soulful people. Thank you. And Steffi, beautiful work that you've done. And I've been delighted in our long friendship that we've been together for quite a few years, navigating the uncertainties of these times. What I'm thinking about in the moment is this past fall, I did a 5-month training on leading grief rituals. And we had people from 30 plus countries involved, and which was very heartening that many people want to show up for the grief work. But one of the questions I got asked to me says, do we all have to be psychologists to do this? And forgive my language here, but I said, if we do, we're fucked. There's nothing more ordinary than being with another human being who's weeping, who's feeling and allowing themselves to feel the gravity of this time. This is the commons of the soul. And we're being invited into the commons with one another. And I have deep faith in the way that grief, when we allow it to be present, softens the heart sufficiently so we can love this world more ardently. So if we avoid the grief, if we avoid the hardship, the heart will harden and congeal and then become unavailable to the streets, to the watersheds, to the children, to the animals, to the world. So I feel like this is one of the core apprenticeships that's being asked of us right now, is to become skillful in the ways of sorrow, because for the next few generations, that is the direction we're heading, unmistakably into the lap of grief. And we need psychology, and we need all of the practices that we have to steady us enough to stand there in the storm of unmitigated grief. These are not easy times we're coming into, or that we're in. We're in what I call the long dark. And in the long dark, we have to get close to the ground. We have to get receptive to the gestational practices of psyche, that it's dreaming something in the depths. And maybe if we get still enough, we might catch a glint of what that dreaming is trying to lead us toward. So delighted to be part of this. May we continue.
Beautiful, thank you. And over to you, Steffi, the guiding light that brought this into life. Thank you for your creative emergence.
I don't have any words of wisdom or something easy to sum things up. I really actually sit with quite a lot of grief. And what I noticed in me is in the first panel, I felt such opening and I was totally with everyone who spoke. And I loved the space and actually the luxury of time. And when we went to the second panel, I really felt, and I can still feel that in me now, I felt enormous gratitude to the people who spoke. And actually, I feel quite tearful because they put their life on the line to actually bring the sort of dirty, messy, shitty change that we need. Somebody needs to step up and be the CEO of a company that has very little chance of bringing about the change that we need. And so I felt the tension, the contrast of the luxury of time, and also the format in which the time constraint was put in again with the people who have the time constraint. And I felt that contrast, and I think for me it illuminated that we haven't even touched the sides with, but we kind of, it illustrated for me how easy it is to have a purity of thought when I don't have, when my thought is never has to be tested at high stakes, where I see people die, where a decision one way or another has like enormous consequences. So the people who kind of, in their own vulnerability and their own fallibility, have the guts to step into that, really deeply touch me. And I feel very privileged to be a psychotherapist because I don't have to do that. I can stand on the sidelines and I can say, I've got a good idea. Why didn't you do it like this? And so that's why I think these kinds of conversations are so important, because we need both. We have the urgency, and Bayo, we need, like your phrase that is repeated so often almost everywhere I go, we have to slow down. And it's both at the same time, is what I feel. And there's a tension in that. And that kind of polarity is, and again, that's borrowing a phrase from France, is stretching us large into something that we don't even know how we can be like that. And for me, I feel the tension and how difficult it is to not have that resolve, to not have this neat ending, but to actually go into the rest of my day and my week and my months with that tension. And so there's enormous gratitude to all of you for showing up, and and to be with that messiness.
Yeah, thank you, Steffi. And I really just love that you brought that tension out here, and I can definitely feel it in the role and the service I brought to this as well, just how painful it is to close spaces that are just opening. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, and with that, we're really moving to look into the future and what are the next steps. And yeah, maybe we can just take a moment together to bless. If we can bring Deepa and James and Caroline back on, and just take a moment here all together to have just feel the intermingling of these spaces. maybe without even needing to say anything, just acknowledging the soulfulness of the deep engagement that each of you bring and have brought here tonight. And is constantly bringing into the world. And may your work in the world be blessed as we move out of this shared conversation and into the next shared rounds of conversation. Yeah. All the best for the election campaign, Caroline. Bye.
Thank you so much, Steffi and Kosha, Bayo, Francis, Thomas, and everybody who came. And Steffi, congratulations on your beautiful book. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, Steffi and I would just like to share a little bit about the next steps. Where can you go from here? What are the possibilities to follow the red threads that you want to follow? So over to you, Steffi.
Yeah, so as I said, the book, it was never about the book. It was always about conversation. It started with conversation, and so this is really important. This is where it is really, and having conversation, difficult conversation across divides. So the next step is really to continue these conversations. I am really trying to bring a systems approach to this theme, and so I don't know where it will lead. I really don't. I didn't know that there would be a book when we had the conversation. I now know that it's not about the book. So I'm starting to curate conversations. This was the first one, and I want the events and like the big ones, small ones, private ones, to learn from each other. Mm-hmm. So really need your feedback, your honest feedback as well. How do we do this in a way that is useful for us? But there will be others that are already in the planning, and out of that, I'm sure there will be emergence for something else. And so the book has got a website, Climate Psychology, Center for Climate Psychology.com. And we will send this to you. And already some of the contributors here have offered to take this work deeper. So Francis is going to offer a 6 months grief facilitator training on this platform. But we really want to listen. So I don't know what is useful. The Center for Climate Psychology is going to, at the moment, literally just listen to what emerges from the conversations. So the most useful would be to kind of sign up to the newsletter. I know you probably get asked this a lot, but it really is a space that is emergent. So I can't tell you what the business plan is or what will happen in the next 6 months or a year. And really, I need to hear your voice as well. Like, what would be useful? But in terms of this conversation, if you have a need, and I'm very aware that we didn't ask the audience to kind of speak, so we didn't hear your voice other than in the chat. And the invitation is take the conversation out to wherever you feel it needs to be. So this doesn't, like, we are going to offer some group spaces where you can continue the conversation. Climate Psychology Alliance are going to run some climate circles on the website as well, Center for Climate Psychology. But and change, it's so new that I keep forgetting the and change bit at the end. But really, it's an encouragement to just take it into the space, into the part of the system that you're in contact with. And there we are. So that's sort of my state of what will happen next.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Steffi. Thank you for this warm and open conversation. It feels a bit like a conversation into your living room, you know, the bigger living room of who you are. And I think we can all feel how deeply you are entwined with your heart, your love, your deep intelligence and attention with everything that is streaming out, and the level of authenticity and integrity that you bring to it is beautiful. So thank you for being you. And also, I just want to plug here that this book is truly, truly beautiful. You know, I hear people here saying more conversations between Bayo, Francis, Nora, and Thomas, please. Well, one place is to just sit with the words in the book, because sometimes, you know, to have the meaning arise from the words, you know, even when we sit ourselves, it does allow it to go deep. And the book is medicine. So I invite you to really support the work also by taking the book out into the world with you. Yeah, and from the Pocket Project, you know, where we really explore the depth of collective traumatization and what are the pathways towards collective healing, founded by Thomas Hübl. Yeah, we offer containers for a collective coming together, a global social witnessing event where we sit in an embodied way with world and see how we can allow it to land more deeply. And but also we bring trauma relief work out into places of crisis, Ukraine, Palestine, Israel, but also areas of climate crisis. So you're welcome to just explore. Yeah, and especially I would like to invite you to a training, a course that is starting soon, which is Applied Trauma-Informed Leadership. So really this bringing the knowledge of nervous system being in the world and noticing how our knowing about regulated nervous system, our knowing about how we can, in those moments where triggers happen, boys walk through rooms and we feel that trigger happening and we have that response sit still coming through us. And such a beautiful sharing from Bayo, that we are able to become awake to it and start creating a new reality together in our teams, in our organizations, in our communities, and also with the natural world. Yeah, so we have a course starting on the 10th of July, which is a real community of practice. And then we'll again have this year the Climate Consciousness Summit, which will be in November in parallel to the UN Climate Conference, and with Bayo, Nora, Thomas, Steffi have all been part of that. And I hope that all of the speakers and key listeners this year will bring their voices to the table, and it just becomes a fest of listening into the spaces that emerge between us and emerge from life. So with that, Steffi, I would like to invite you back online. Yeah, let's just for a moment be here together.
And just a really warm thank you to you, Kosha, for having invited the book launch onto the platform and all the help that you provided with that and your facilitation. So I'm really grateful for everything you have contributed to this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's also this edge, right, of working with a team to create something. So, yeah, and then the spaciousness that is created in the spaces we create. And I know how hard people work in the background. So just thank you to all those who are holding space in the background. And with that, I would love us to go back to gallery view. Thank you, Steffi, and we will continue evolving this friendship and collaboration. Yeah, and let's come back to you. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey, for bringing your wisdom into the chat and just into the presence. Yeah, and I apologize for all the wisdom that you carry, all the uniqueness that you bring that didn't find space and expression in this call tonight. And just thank you for the depth of your listening and your being and your engaging. And as Francis said, this work of keeping our hearts soft, whatever it takes, keeping our hearts soft and staying in this related web of life together.